one of the reasons why hashtags were so valuable to Instagram in the early days was because it was before we had computer vision algorithms that could be used across the millions and billions of photos that were being uploaded to Instagram.
You literally can't tell if it's like croissant or like muffin or dog.
Yeah, or hot dogs or knees.
Yeah,
right?
until like
whatever.
1 year ago. So
Yeah.
of course there was a whole span in between where we could not tell. Yeah.
Yeah. So like the search experience would be pretty terrible unless users had gone in and added those labels. But the idea of using the hashtag is that it's universal across all social media that allows a user to type text. And so that was another aspect of it that was very important because you can add metadata, even like concepts or tags or geo coordinates to the metadata of photos. But many times platforms will strip out that metadata because it's not visible to the user. And now you've lost valuable information about it, especially if there's like reposts or someone downloads it and then compresses it and then uploads it elsewhere. But you can't really downsample a hashtag. So it's sort of like is persistent across platforms. And as a result, that original metadata stays with the content no matter where it
Welcome
goes.
to Taste and Tactics, where founders and go-to-market leaders share how they brought their boldest ideas to life. From concept to execution, we cover every step behind these iconic launches. Join me each week for both inspiration and actionable tips. I'm Shriya Nevatia. Let's dive in.
Today, I'm so excited to feature Chris Messina on the podcast. He is the inventor of the hashtag, which is what we're talking about today. He's also the #1 product hunter. So if you're not familiar with Product Hunt, every single day there's upvoted product launches and software launches, and he's super passionate and hyperactive on this platform. He hunts many products to help them get visibility, which means that he shares the product and endorses it, and he is the person behind that launch. He's also an active investor. He runs the Ride Home AI Fund, and he is a very experienced product designer who's worked across startups and corporations like Google and Uber. I think that he's one of the OG community organizers of tech because he's run a lot of amazing events, conferences, digital communities, and that really brings us back to why he created the hashtag and what kind of he intended as the ethos of the product. So listen on to hear more about Chris. Hey, Chris, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, glad to be here.
Really excited to dive into the story of how you invented the hashtag today. This is a very interesting story, started 18 years ago now, has a lot of ups and downs, and you have told it before, but what I really want to dive into today is all of the pieces of distribution, who it got in front of, and how. So tell us a little about what you're up to now and what we're going to be hearing about.
Yeah. I guess I'm still sort of in the process of figuring out what I want to be when I grow up, ultimately. But clearly, my experience with social media and the hashtag gives me sort of an interesting lens on where we are currently in this AI moment. I think a lot about culture and tools and technology, language, the way that these things all kind of work together.
Totally. And if I remember correctly, you're also the #1 product hunter. And so that's kept you really close to the cutting edge throughout the years of technology adoption and this current AI explosion that we're midway through, early days through.
I think it's
This is
pretty
definitely
early days.
Yeah. But it's grown much faster than
I mean, just
anything else.
to create a point on that, the product hunt thing is relevant. One, because it was always just a little passion kind of hobby of mine. Like many social platforms, I've tried most of them, and some of them stuck, some of them went away, some of them were acquired. Product Hunt was and has been a place where people who are building things get to kind of put their ideas out in the arena and people try them. And then there's this 24-hour surge of interest and teardowns. And for me, it's a really great kind of petri dish to see what types of cultural products resonate. It also requires that the people who are building these things go through almost this acid distillation process of being able to describe exactly the value of the thing that they've created, not purely from their own personal preferences, but in a way that will resonate with other people in 60 characters or less. And so, if you thought that old Twitter required brevity and succinctness, Product Hunt is even more so, and that's from a product perspective. And so I've now done it over 4,200 launches. And so I've seen a lot of stuff. And I've also seen the ways in which people communicate the value of products and technologies. And I think I've developed an intuition about how things will resonate for different audiences. And so I think that's also a big part of how I'm looking at things right now. The other thing is, in November 2022, I saw ChatGPT come out and I quickly posted it to Product Hunt and it became the product of the year. And as a result of seeing that and all the products that have come downstream of that since then, I have a very clear, I think, position to almost like see the tide come in of all these new opportunities and attempts to build software in the SaaS framework and pricing model. And I think that's all going away quite soon. So I don't think people have really come to embody what that means and how the whole industry is going to change.
Yeah, yeah, because there's been a lot of eras, and I think like also when you're checking Product Hunt every day and there's daily launches and it's scrapped for the next day, you're starting over fresh. You get to see these trends and waves of like 30 similar products, 100 similar products, and then with the AI boom, you start to see 3,000 similar products, and you're like, wait, this is a
Yeah.
much higher volume.
I mean, to literally like put numbers to that, like every day now, Product Hunt features anywhere from 15 to 25 products. However, those are the products that are sort of above the line. Every day, there's around 250 products that are launched. So on a weekly basis, you can just imagine how much that is. And so you have like AI slop on social media, but you also have like AI product slop as well. And so the commoditization of the ability to build products is this fascinating moment where it's becoming more expensive to sell software than it is to make it. And as a result, you can build software for yourself. And then if it works, then you can propagate it in a way that was never possible before, which ties directly into, I think, my experience with the hashtag.
Yeah. Let's roll it back. We're back in 2007, very different era. AI buzzwords, whenever they come up, mean something very different than they do now. It's kind of like Facebook launched in 2004. We're in that era, social media suffused era of tech. So tell me about the initial concept of the hashtag, kind of the spark and how you thought of it.
Well, I think it's worth it to set the table even like more so in the sense
Totally.
that social media in the early days, let's say 2005 to 2008, both was a bit of a backwater in that mainstream media really didn't think about it at all and didn't use it. So you had conventional media, CNN, New York Times, like these platforms, were mostly interested in building their own web properties and driving traffic to them. And that was the era where Google was really in its earliest like ascendancy. So social media was like this quiet place where a bunch of, again, early geeks and nerds were kind of hanging out and sharing the things that we were up to, the things that we were doing. It was a great way for us to coordinate amongst ourselves to find out what was going on. We had early photo sharing platforms like Flickr. We had similar platforms to like Luma or Eventbrite called Upcoming. And it was built sort of by and for us. Those who were sort of there as the pioneers of this space were just building things that we knew that we needed and mostly defaulting to public by default because trying to add privacy into these platforms, aside from Facebook, one was very hard. And second, took away a lot of the value. I mean, one, there just wasn't a lot of density. So if you wanted to connect to other people, you kind of had to make it public for people to find it. And so that also set the frame for a lot of the products that came out and grew around that time. And so Twitter was absolutely one of them. Came out in 2006. And up until that point, a lot of us who had been early to the social web were mostly bloggers. So we kind of, wanted, of course, people to find and discover and read us. And so Twitter became a way for us to share those updates out of like feed readers or RSS readers into a platform that allowed you to publish using text messaging. And so suddenly our phones that we had with us all the time, this is before the iPhone, became a way to keep our friends up to date. And you didn't have to go back to your laptop, back to a computer and write and publish. And so that in and of itself was, I don't know if we fully got it because it was still weird. It was like if you posted an update in 140 characters, which is not a lot, it meant that everybody who was following you would get a text message from you. And so you kind of had to like really mean it or say something quite clever.
It's like a group chat of like a very large group chat, very high stakes, how many eyes will be on it. And I remember that one of Jack Dorsey's like first 5 tweets or something was just about like eating cereal.
Yes.
Yeah. Very different vibe. Like, I mean, you could say that now, but you don't think that millions of people will actually read it. Like they're going to scroll by. Who cares?
One, you have like now the problem of like the algorithm kind of like, deciding against amping that kind of content. And two, there's, I don't know, this sort of identity curation and expression element that's come in, especially with visual media, where, like it blew my mind. Like to me, in the early days, it was about like kind of getting ideas out there and then like leaving them up, kind of like creating these artifacts that would just persist. And the idea of deleting posts if they didn't perform well was like anathema to like my values around, I guess, transparency and authenticity. But over time with a platform like Instagram, people would post photos, and if they didn't get enough likes within a certain period of time, they'd like delete them. And it became much more a matter of vanity than about expression. And that shift, I mean, obviously I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but is in contrast to the ways in which we were using it really early and kind of perfunctorily. Just like if you didn't have anything to say, you'd just be like, yeah, I'm just like, eating a burrito in the Mission or something. And like someone would be like, oh yeah, I love burritos in the Mission. It was just like so dumb and so like sincere. And obviously it's become much more professionalized since then. So we've lost something in that. But at the same time, now everyone kind of is aware of it and uses it.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, tell us about this transition from the things that were for those like geeks, nerds, and insiders to the widespread public, because hashtags were barred from IRC chat. A lot of people now are like, what the hell is IRC chat? Because hashtags are reach a much bigger audience. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think like the other way to think about this back in that era, is that as we started to being like the early web people, realized that there were people who lived in the real world who we could connect with that were not weirdos or strangers. We started to organize events to get those people together. And that was kind of the early days of the Web 2.0 community. So if the first, web was really about just like documents and, publishing articles and things like that, Web 2.0 was about bringing people and social and APIs into the mix where you could start to remix these platforms and create all sorts of new things. And so we would get together in these events. One of the big ones was South by Southwest, but another event that I co-organized, which is actually hitting its 20-year anniversary in next month,
Nice.
it's called Barcamp. And that event was an unconference. That meant that anybody could show up, and the event was self-organizing. So anybody who wanted to present could do so. We had a grid, like a big spreadsheet on a wall, and it had times down the side, down on the y-axis, and on the top you had like rooms. And so people could just like pick where they wanted to go. They could have a conversation, and then they go from there. And we started to use Twitter as a way to let people know, one, about what was going on at the events, and then two, to cross-pollinate updates from between different bar camps that were happening all over the world. And we needed a way to identify posts that were about specific events. And so, as you were saying with IRC, when you go into IRC, which was the predecessor to Slack, you'd go into a channel, and then that channel would have a prefix, like a pound symbol, and then like whatever the channel name was, team or random, things like that. But you could do the same thing with events, Barcamp, Palo Alto, for example. And so the idea was to take that concept and apply it to this SMS-based network so that people could find each other. And so that's kind of where the proposal came from. And the other thing that that I was trying to solve for was not just kind of creating channels that would restrict media from being seen by people who are not in channels, which is a group, but instead to use these channels as also like labels. So you could have more than one tag in a given tweet. I mean, you only had 140 characters. So, for every tag you added, that's an extra, pound symbol that's taking away from like what you can say. And so it wasn't until October of, forgetting my years, 2007, thank you, that my friend Nate Ritter, who had been to a bunch of these, or a bunch, maybe was planning Barcamp in San Diego, started or decided to use the hashtag on Twitter to share information about a wildfire that was going on down there. And so that was one of the first cases where the behavior that we'd pioneered and experimented with for our events suddenly became useful for citizen journalism. And so when a lot of the public infrastructure was failing, especially like cellular networks and the ability to get information out, the text message service persisted. And so that's why Twitter was actually very useful then to get information to people who are trying to get information about whether or not they should evacuate or not. And so that use case ended up getting picked up by Wired, and then Wired helped to carry the story, which then broadcast it to a much broader audience. And so that era, it's late 2007, as well as the launch of the iPhone in January of that year, I think sort of kicked off this shift in the way that normal people would use and approach technology. It could be very valuable, one, for learning about what was going on in the world from your peers. That was very exciting and interesting. And two, now you have this brand new device with multi-touch that allowed you to participate on these, to use the web in the real world in a way that didn't make you feel like you were using technology.
Yeah, very smooth, seamless, no little BlackBerry-esque keyboard.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of the software and technology back then was really, one, it was expensive, and two, it was sort of predicated on being used for a business use case. And that's why you'd spend money on it, because it was for your job. And a BlackBerry specifically was for people who were like professionals,
Yes.
in
Yes.
New York. And us weirdos on the West Coast were like, well, why can't we use these same tools for self-expression and for social purposes? Obviously, much less, well, at the time, financially incentivized. But nonetheless, it gave us a way to connect and find other people who are like us. And from a community generating perspective, that was a true game changer.
And I remember that you've said that Twitter did not embrace this at first. So what really convinced them? What turned it around?
Fear, probably, I mean, as has been said many times, Twitter is one of those cases where they kind of like drove a clown car into a gold mine, because so many of the things that I think the people who are building Twitter thought about Twitter turned out either to be wrong, or when they did listen to their users, it turned out to go well. And it took a long time, because, they had a vision for how simple Twitter needed to be in the early days. They wanted Twitter to be useful by, their proverbial moms. And for some reason, I guess none of their moms were like rocket scientists or something, which is ridiculous. And so they were like, well, we can't introduce this complex, pound symbol thing for tags because, we previously sold our company to Google, and Google's all about algorithms. And so you should just be able to type what you want and you'll get the thing out. And, like to this day, that argument is still happening on social media. It's one of the reasons why Elon is against hashtags. He thinks that they're not like useful, but it leaves out the aspect of intent. Before we created the event Barcamp, how would you know? I mean, I suppose you could use different geolocation signals or things like that to try to place this content on a map. Or you could just ask people to add a special identifier that identifies the thing that they're doing or participating in. It can also be the case where, let's say, like, for example, Outside Lands is a big concert that's going on now. And if you're on a specific stage, like, yes, you might want all of the Outside Lands content to be visible to you. Or maybe you just want content that's about a specific artist or a specific music genre. And if the user can add that information to their post, instantly that makes the content that much more relevant to their audience. Or if it's like some new concept or something that, like, I don't know, for example, there was a big fire recently at one of the other festivals. Not fire festival specifically. Well, you could use fire festival actually if you wanted to, right? But like if you want to create something new out of nothing, it's sort of temporary autonomous zone where users can come together to have a conversation about something. Hashtag Firefest is its own thing. And if it hasn't been created yet in the world, then no algorithm is going to be able to detect the negative space of something that people haven't declared. So that's the value of this, like, going forward. And that's why I thought it was so important in the early days of Twitter. But they were like, no, we're going to have algorithms. That's going to solve our problem. And they resisted for so long until Instagram came out and started to eat their lunch. And with the popularity of Instagram, suddenly Twitter was in a position of saying, oh shit, like, they're going to monetize the hashtag before we do. I guess we should actually embrace it after all. And so, not to say that I was right, but it was a more commercial minded reason for them to adopt this, because they hadn't actually solved the problem in the number of years that they'd had after the hashtag had been out there and had been pretty widely adopted by at least the early users of these platforms.
Yeah, and I'm realizing something about Instagram, actually. I don't know if they had this and then removed it. Even the hashtags now that are in the comments, they're not actually hyperlinked, right? Because there aren't any links to the comments. And so they're just plain text, but then you can search them under browse and then see things with that hashtag, which is interesting because it's not even really like visually indicating the utility of it. You have to be in the know somewhat, but now everyone's in the know, so it's not really in the know. Another thing
I would add one more thing to that, which is like one of the reasons why hashtags were so valuable to Instagram in the early days was because it was before we had computer vision algorithms that could be used across the millions and billions of photos that were being uploaded to Instagram.
You literally can't tell if it's like croissant or like muffin or dog.
Or hot dogs or knees.
Yeah,
right?
until like 1 year ago. So of course there was a whole span in between where we could not tell. Yeah.
So like the search experience would be pretty terrible unless users had gone in and added those labels. Now, whether you use normal words or whether you use hashtags for that purpose, maybe it doesn't matter that much. But the idea of using the hashtag is that it's universal across all social media that allows a user to type text. And so that was another aspect of it that was very important, because you can add metadata even like concepts or tags or geo coordinates to the metadata of photos. But many times platforms will strip out that metadata because it's not visible to the user. And now you've lost valuable information about it, especially if there's like reposts or someone downloads it and then compresses it and then uploads it elsewhere. But you can't really downsample a hashtag. So it's sort of like is persistent across platforms. And as a result, that original metadata stays with the content no matter where it goes.
Another thing that I think is that I'm realizing as you say the story in that social media era specifically, currently, like some of the times that I was looking for a hashtag like experience was the finales of big shows like Severance and White Lotus, the latest season. People are often using the actual @ symbol of a
The show
full show or professional, like an organization or media
handle.
company.
Yeah.
But at the time, as you said, New York Times and CNN, they were not making it. This looked like something for friends and people. It was like, why would we do that? You weren't making 25 Twitter accounts for every single city's bar camp versus
Right.
these days, if
That's right.
somebody builds a distributed community and events business, educational business, they do. That's one of the first
Yeah.
things you do. You make all these different
That's
like
right.
squad and all these handles. And so you needed another organizational tool to show something that wasn't individuals because you weren't just tagging people, you were tagging organizations.
Yep. It's that, and it's also depending on the individuals who are using the hashtag. Some people would actually get quite precise and specific with their tags. So you could imagine like someone uses like hashtag barcamp, but they'll also use like hashtag barcamp 2005 or hashtag barcamp Palo Alto. And so you essentially have a series or sequence of tags that get more precise and more specific so that a sub community can actually find that content and interact with it. And so to your point, like you might have like hashtag like Severance, or maybe you tag the show itself, but then you have a bunch of like people who are like going off into like different directions and having sub
Severance
conversations,
theories.
right?
Like
Where you can like
Severance
find from, like the
haters.
exactly. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah. Right. So the fact that it allows for these like momentary, again, like it's like sort of a bar conversation that just like happens. A bunch of people, come together, they kind of like talk about it and then it dissipates and it goes away. Do you really want to like register a domain name for that or like register a new handle and like go through like account verify? Like you want something that's disposable but useful. And so I think that's kind of why the value of the tag like persists, even though there's like plenty of other tools now that overlap with some of the, behaviors that the hashtag first sort of like solved for.
Yeah, like there's some interesting behaviors that were rolled out in the intervening years that like took pieces of the utility and created defined ways to embrace it. So like a long running thread by one person
Right.
where they're like connecting a lot of different ideas, not available for quite a few years. I feel like I was a user
I
by
mean,
the time
actually,
it rolled out.
importantly, yeah, it was like, I want to say 2009 or maybe 10 before you could reply to a specific tweet. Like you could like
They were just
mention the
individual.
person,
Yeah.
but like you had to be there within a few minutes or seconds in order for it to appear together. It was only much later when they changed something in the API that allowed you to say, this post is in reply to or response to this other post. And then therefore you could create threads. But threads weren't even something that really existed. And so a hashtag was a way to unify or to create kind of like a, it's almost like, not charcuterie, but like, when you have like one of those toothpicks and, you sort of like stick something through it. It's like
a skewer, like a
skewer. Exactly.
a skewer of like
Yeah.
a variety. Yeah. You're threading all these disparate things together.
It's a content skewer. Exactly.
Yeah. The other thing I think of is those like quote tweet rabbit holes where you click the embedded one all the way down to the original, especially when people are doing a trend. They're like, show yourself like cute as a kid and then dorky as a middle schooler and then cute again now. Like any of those where it's a viral thing. Very interesting. Or the recent lore about yourself, which is all just one quote tweet over and over. Again, something that would have required a hashtag before that concept was even visually possible.
It's like a worthwhile point to consider because it raises the tension between over design or premature design and just the ability to experiment, right? So the fact that the hashtag sort of demanded a pretty simplistic approach, when creating the tag, basically you have like a pound symbol as the prefix and then a bunch of letters. And that's all you get. But with that allows for a great amount of experimentation and exploration. For example, in my own posts, like I do a lot of like sleuthing in what kind of new features apps are building. And so I have hashtags like hashtag new Spotify when I've discovered a new feature. And that's a hashtag that I've been using for years. that probably very few other people use. And as a result, I can sort of trace the lineage of my content across these platforms. Even as like, I don't even use X anymore. I've moved over to like Threads and Blue Sky, but I continue to use the same tags. And so at some point, after I'm long dead, people can go back and like excavate all my content and see this like through line because I've decided to like add this extra metadata to my posts. And for people who didn't, I feel like it's going to be much harder to sort of be like, what are they even talking about? Maybe it was like in the moment and it was a trending topic, but there's nothing that sort of explains what they were actually referring to. And so therefore a lot of meaning ends up getting lost.
When people do a vague subtweet with a lot
Exactly.
of subtext and they're like,
Yes.
no, he didn't send.
That
You're like,
exactly. Right.
wow, am I just not cool enough to know
And
who
it's about
he
like
is and what
Kanye
he
or Drake
did?
or something.
Yeah,
And you're like,
you're like,
who even knows?
you're like, yeah, I would love to see some community notes pop up and be like, this is because Kanye said something inflammatory again. Here's the
Exactly.
here's the original tweet. Our AI has gotten so advanced that we can read people's minds. Okay, so before we get into the AI stuff, because I know that that's a really interesting chunk, one of the differences between this and a lot of the other product launches that we're going to talk about in Taste and Tactics is that this is not your company and product. This isn't a thing that you created yourself and then had quite a bit of control over how it grew and spread. And perhaps if people misused it, you could be like, fine, shutting it down, or I'm banning this. How has that been to watch it take on a life of its own? What are some of the misuses that you were frustrated by? Did you ever try and shut something down or discourage it?
I mean, this is a very rich vein. I think that for people who are like building products or are interested in, having cultural impact, there's a lot I think to learn from the example of the hashtag. It's like not specifically about me. It's just kind of like how these phenomena take root and then grow over time. To the degree that you can like influence these things at all, you end up in this interesting dialectic between what you sort of hope and aspire for and all the context that you have and all the ways in which you've seen someone use or abuse the thing that you've created, with all the ways that people find mysterious and magical applications of it that you never anticipated and might find quite cringy or are quite offended by. And so you have to like love it all in a way. It's sort of, I liken it more to, I think these days, I guess because now I have 3 garden beds and so now I grow, vegetables, like, sometimes the shit goes wild and like, or frost comes in and like wipes out the crop, like whatever it is. Like,
you don't have control of the outcome. It's not just about
No,
your
and
inputs. Yeah.
I think that, I guess like the point that's also like worth bringing up is that for the first 5 or 6 years, my relationship to the hashtag was one that I was like an anonymous creator of. I kind of put the idea out there. I started using it. I documented how I thought it could be used in a blog post. And then that was it. I kind of like set it free. And behind the scenes, I was advocating for its adoption in a lot of the early Twitter APIs and products. And then developers, mostly who were annoyed by my persistence, would just be like, whatever, I'll do it for you just to get you out of my hair. I got other stuff to work on. I couldn't like vibe code things back then and sort of like give them the solution. I would just be like, I think this is like really useful. You should do it. And then like, whatever, Messina. And slowly it kind of like got adopted. But obviously once the commercial side of social media, I guess, turned it more into commercial media, and then, trends and popularity and visibility and this new weird quasi advertising space grew up, then people found ways of exploiting the hashtag and exploiting what were genuine or authentic conversations that were enabled by the hashtag to then kind of like try to like spam them and take over them like every other open system and platform. That became very, I don't know if it's like frustrating or just kind of you throw up your hands and you say, well, that's what people are going to do. Just like plants are seeking the attention of the sun, humans are seeking the attention of the others. And if they can find some leverage point to do that, they will do it. And they will stomp over anything or any beautiful little integrity thing that you have built into it. So as I saw people start to abuse hashtags and to spam them, I think for a lot of people that became the defining characteristic of it because they were so ubiquitous and so annoying and so noisy. And
because that was what they were trying to do. It's like if a like egocentric growth hacker is trying to run over people using a tool like this in an effective way, they're going to flood the system, as
Yeah.
you're saying.
They're
And
going to
then,
take
yeah.
over other genuine like sources of attention, like harvesting or gathering, in order to exploit that resource, that attention resource, in order to benefit themselves.
Mhm.
And so, unfortunately, people would see the use of hashtags in that way and then associate that behavior with hashtags, as opposed to understanding like the original source and premise of hashtags, which was to enable individuals to have conversations with each other. And it's in some ways like why I'm relieved that like Elon has banned advertisers on X from using hashtags. It's because I don't want like this to be a commercial like tool exclusively. It's
Mhm.
something that really should deliver power back to the people and individuals who want to talk to themselves. You know, the grand irony of Elon wanting to control his platform and introduce, you know, AI companions or whatever else he's going to do, you know, is that like the
Those or
hashtag.
something. I cannot believe that's on a generalized platform. That's kind of, yeah, that's one of the most baffling recent AI developments to me. It's like, put this in a separate app, please. But anyway,
You know, maybe he knows his audience, or maybe he wants his audience to be more like him. I'm not quite sure
yeah,
which it
yeah.
is, but
Yeah. Okay, I think that we've touched on some AI stuff for a while, and I'm very curious because I haven't really thought of this specific thing. So, the influence of widespread artificial intelligence tools and access, and how that comes back to some of the like guiding foundational ideas of why the hashtag was created. What's the future of the hashtag, and what's the future of the concepts behind the hashtag in an AI world?
also a big, juicy question. Maybe the biggest thing that I've noticed, or that I feel like that my intuition tells me, is that we're very much in this transitional window where we're still trying to figure out what this new medium is and is for and allows us to do, and to what degree we want to change our language and the way that we express ourselves to become more like the outputs of generative AI, or to be more like prompts. I mean, frankly, I can imagine, and this is going to sound insane, but I actually think this is probably going to be where it goes. But that in not too long, not the distant future, people will show up on dates and they will actually go through a prompt exercise where they will say what they want for the date, and they'll kind of like characterize or classify everything. It sounds weird, and yet if you have that experience, you know, every day talking to like Claude or ChatGPT, then your brain starts to take a shape that is, you know, your linguistic expression changes.
I
This
mean,
happened to me with
yeah, it
Twitter.
didn't
You
take a
know,
long
this
time to
happened
incorporate like
with Instagram.
into
Right,
everyday
exactly.
conversation.
Yeah,
It took very few years for that to
that's
go
right. I mean,
from
even
people
the
talking. Yeah,
hashtag became part of verbal language,
yeah.
right? You know, there was like hashtag raps and stuff like that. So given that that is probably going to happen, I think there's a question as to how do we maintain some sense of influence over the way that we interact with each other, interact, you know, with the computer, and then how the computer interacts with us. What do we demand of those relationships, and how do we make it so that ultimately we're not debasing either? Because I think it turns out that like when you harm any other system, eventually that harm comes back around to hurt you.
Hmm.
And so it just seems like, you know, I had this talk several years ago for TEDx, you know, about the technology of better humans, and it wasn't so much the concept of like transhumanism and changing like what and who we are, but that the way that we build our technology and the way that we think about the downstream ramifications of it can either be inclusionary or exclusionary. And also the degree to which we make it transparent can help other people understand more of the kind of direction of travel or the intent of the creator or the people that are building it. And it's interesting now because more than ever, in the consumer technology development life cycle that I've been a part of, you hear companies like Anthropic talking about constitutional AI and about thinking about the human factors and the human matters of this. Part of it is some of them want to actually create the successor to humanity, which I'm not super on board with. And at the same time, I do think that people are going to be interacting with these intelligences in ways that are deeply disturbing and troubling when it comes to our own, I don't know, beneficence like in the world, or our uniqueness in the world. And so from like an egoistic perspective, it's going to be very hard, I think, for us to make sense of what this is and what we do with ourselves. I
Hmm.
already think like there's a younger generation that's coming up that's suffering from a kind of like ennui or just like boredom unless something is like super engaging. And if individuals, humans, can't compete with the interestingness of these, you know, voice assistants, how do we then continue to invest in and create human connections and relationships that are elevating and valuable and interesting? And there's plenty of people that are going to say that I'm like, stupid. And why am I even worried about that? But on the other hand, I've also seen like the growth of social media and how people use it and how they use it to abuse each other. And so it only makes sense that some of our more base instincts are going to be amplified through these platforms. And I don't think that we're prepared for that. So I guess like to bring this all the way back around to what you were saying, just as I've seen people use and abuse like hashtags, both commercially and interpersonally, to create bullying campaigns and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to see the same thing with generative AI. Yeah, Gamergate is a great example.
Yeah.
So unless we really invest in, I think, two things. One is just general curiosity, about the world, just kind of like a willingness to receive and to not know things. But then secondly, a greater sense of mutuality between people, such that you can be like, wow, if I say something mean to this person, like I have no idea what's going on in their lives. I have no idea what's happening to them. It's actually creating more like that momentary sense of experiencing power over someone else quickly actually like lowers the social integrity of culture in general. And so I know this is like very abstract and whatever, but when I look at, the rise in the use of social media and of course the hashtag as a secondary outcome of that, it only seems to me that in 5 to 10 years, what I'm saying now is going to seem trite, given the way that people have figured out how to abuse each other using these tools.
It's interesting to think, I'm definitely one of those people who has turned to ChatGPT to talk about personal issues and try to keep telling myself in my head, like, it's not a therapist, don't rely on it, it's biased because you're listening to it. But of course, like you're the only one telling your perspective. Of course, it's still pretty useful. And so I wonder if we'll get to an age where there's just absolutely no privacy around that information. And thus, when you see a tweet under yours that says, like, go die, idiot, it's like this person's like father just passed away 3 days ago. We're not going to give you more details, but just a heads up. Don't be too offended. They're in deep pain and they're letting it out on you.
Like, I think that's amazing, in a way. Like,
well, that's the question. Like, is that like an amazing addition to human empathy and depth, or is it a violation of something that person signed away in gigantic terms and conditions, or is it perverting our ability to interact with other people because we can read each other's minds? I don't know if you're a sci-fi person, but like one of the things in Three Body Problem is that in their other planet, in their other planet, everyone can read each other's minds. So there's all kinds of concepts that don't exist. They're like, what's a secret? What are you talking?
Exactly.
You can't have one. No. We don't even. We can't even imagine that.
Right.
Yeah, it's going to change communication a lot for better and for worse. But the question of worse is always like, are we just being Luddites? Are we saying like, oh my God, the like invention of writing is going to ruin the ability of people to remember things and do oral storytelling, or is it actually worse?
I think that's like the right kind of lens to like visit this idea. This question of like secrets and privacy has been something that has haunted my career. I've worked on digital identity platforms and systems from the beginning because it always occurred to me that like identity was the ultimate platform. How you express oneself or yourself and how you create consistency over time is how people know you and how you develop authenticity and trust. And now we live in a world where it is completely possible to invent, a million billion different like agents or personas or profiles. I mean, 90% of the entities that I interact with on social media, it's not clear to me whether or not a human, hand wrote the things or whether it's something else. In which case, the only way that I have any sense of trust is by knowing or having some inkling about the values or about like the longevity of someone's presence in this like digital, substrate. But even that is like really hard to do at scale. And I mean, it's just like, it's like walking around in New York and like, there could be a bunch of like robots amongst you and you just don't know. And so like, how does that change things? Should it change things? Anyways, when it comes to this question about privacy and secrecy, I've also thought about the value and purpose of shame in culture. Because to your point, if someone is acting out and let's say they haven't done a lot of emotional development or that wasn't part of their, wherever they were raised, kind of like the way of processing, the self and how the self is experiencing things.
It down.
Totally. Yeah. Right. Then that could be hugely enabling to sort of allow someone to, be having a really hard time, but then giving them that space and that encouragement or, like maybe they do go to ChatGPT and, I don't know because I think it goes both ways. Like you said, it can be sycophantic and reinforce the existing ideas that you have about the world, or going back to my point about curiosity, if instead you can or are willing to ask, well, what about this might I have wrong? Or like, in what way am I not seeing the full picture? And help me get grounded into something that's like true, touch grass, whatever it happens to be. Because we're starting to see some people, I think, recently there was an investor who seems to be kind of going off the deep end based on a set of conversations that he's had. That's a little bit like a choose your own adventure novel come to life. And he's quite convinced of things that seem quite far-fetched. I don't know if he's tapped into some other knowledge pathway way of knowing, but when you encounter this type of intelligence and it's fully interactive and tells you the things that you're susceptible to believe, what's the escape hatch? What's the way to come back to community and say, wow, I've kind of like been out in the forest for a while and I was lost. And now, okay, like I'm back with other people and humans. And through that triangulation of sense making, I can see that what I was thinking of was just a great big hallucinatory dream. And now I'm back into my grounded self.
Or
But
what
I don't,
happens when,
it's going to, yeah.
yeah, most people are hallucinating. And so it's very hard to get grounded.
This is what I'm saying, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we're not ready, I think is the TLDR.
Okay, this is awesome. I'm sure we could talk for much longer, but I like to make these a reasonable length because, when I'm listening myself,
Sure.
if I see 3 hours and 20
You're
minutes,
like, all
I'm
right, let's go.
oh man. Okay, so I love to ask, how do you define great taste when it comes to a product or brand? What does that look like to you? What do you think of when you think of the word taste?
Taste is so much based on what you choose not to do. We now live in a world where you can kind of build anything, you can make anything, but just because you can doesn't mean you should. It's like you may have a spice rack full of different flavors, but it doesn't mean you should put them all in the same dish. So I think taste, I mean, quite literally in that application is about discovering something that either is like, novel or brings a certain perspective or connects to something real in your life or your past that you want to express, that you want to share, that you want to put out there, and that has a kind of integral resonance. Meaning that if I create something that's a certain, I don't know, like if it's like a painting, a drawing or something, and I give it to you, that the way in which you receive it, or like music, I think is probably the best example of this, where you create something to express some internal state. And then when it's received, that internal state is felt, is understood. Taste is the kind of conveyance of the particulars of your perspective, almost incepted into someone else's brain, I guess. So part of it is through simplicity. I'll give you actually a living example right now that actually relates to the whole hashtag thing. So I'm a user of an app called Craft. It's a Mac app that's kind of like Bear or even like Notes. And yeah, it's funny, actually, I forgot that Notes has hashtags now, but like Craft is in the process of beta testing hashtags, and they have folders and they've got tags, but they haven't had hashtags. And there's a debate currently going on about whether or not they should have nested tags. And plenty of apps have nested tags, but introducing hierarchy in the first version of tags in a product, the simplest way to say it is it's a choice. However, I could worry based on my experience that introducing extra complexity like too early or too soon ultimately will mean that then you might have to walk it back, which is disappointing and it's very distracting, takes a long time, or that you'll end up breaking a bunch of norms and conventions that you didn't even like think of or weren't even aware of. So in some ways, like taste is about discipline. It's about restraint. And it's like, yes, you can have a million billion ideas and you can try lots of experiments and you can learn, be very quick at learning. And as long as you find a way to ingest those lessons and socialize them, within a product organization or within a company or whatever it is, then you can go forward from there, perhaps with a little bit more, both like conviction, but also integrity. It's like, what are you really trying to solve for? Or are you just being clever? I had to, when I was working on Google Plus, they also wanted to implement hashtags. But they too, like every place I've seen to interact with, wanted to like reinvent the idea. And they thought that you should be able to have spaces in hashtags. And so they're going to have a pound symbol in the front and a pound symbol at the back. You could have all the words you wanted, and that could be your tag.
Yeah.
Seems okay until you realize that one of the strategies for Google Plus was to ingest content from other platforms like Twitter. And so suddenly now if you're reposting content or syndicating content from one platform to another, Google Plus is the one that breaks the convention for every other place. And so if you're trying to create media that's social media and you want it to be universal, then you have to be very careful about introducing complexity that is not shared globally.
Are you doing this just for uniqueness? I think there's two interesting elements. Like restraint to me is the one that comes up very often in products, as you're saying, like in the world of commerce and business. But the first one, which was kind of more of like communicating a thought or emotion, is one that comes up in artwork. And in artwork, of course, there is restraint. You're not going to dump every single form of media and every concept you have related to what you're trying to communicate in one film or one painting. And yet it's still like, how do I strip away all these distractions into the actual purpose I'm trying to get to? So yeah.
It's like, what is the essence, right? Because like the critique of something that is not tasteful is to be muddled, to be too blended. And so when it comes to like, do you
disjointed, confusing, right. What are you trying to,
it's where
what are
you're
you trying to do?
Too many,
what are you trying to get at? Yeah.
You've been lazy about the choices.
Yeah.
And then therefore you kind of pass them off to the audience to then figure it out. And that's where like sometimes it can be intentional, but if you're really talking about taste, which I think is an incredibly important part of where we're going next when it comes to products, like taste is a way of demonstrating valuable choices over time from an authentic place. And that authenticity is what allows for that resonant signal for someone to say, like, this feels like a Figma product, or this feels like a Slack experience, or this feels like, I don't know, like a Meta product based on the taste that they do or don't apply.
Yeah, you have a through line. Also, another interesting piece of it when you're someone who's creating multiple things under one brand, under one person, under one concept. How do you use taste to connect them together? Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really excited to have you here. I think there were so many interesting concepts that we can all borrow to whatever we're building next. So thanks again. Have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. Thanks. This is great.
Awesome. Thanks so much for listening to our episode with Chris. Really excited about all the things that we learned and the interesting directions this conversation went in. So some of the things that I'm taking away from this are, first, that often the most potent product ideas come out of solving our own problems. So I think a lot of you have probably thought about this before, but I do really like the concept of solving a problem that you have internally in your company or community, and then realizing that perhaps that has some utility for many people and sharing it publicly. Would highly recommend that you don't keep those insights to yourself and share them with others. Another thing that I really admire about Chris is his ability to stay at the center of things for many years. So he's super active on before Twitter and X, and now on Threads and Blue Sky, obviously really active on Product Hunt. And in that way, he's been able to see the evolution of so many industry trends because he's really like soaking up all of the information around him and actually leading it by creating the hashtag, by organizing events. And that's something that I like to do personally and that I recommend to everyone, is really like watch those things long-term evolve and remember the cycles of history, because then you're a little bit less susceptible to the harmful impacts of different like economic and trend cycles in the industry. And the last thing that I take away is that Chris's story is really unique among most of our guests, because he released the hashtag not under his own brand or company. It was this independent concept that was then adopted by both Twitter and lots of other platforms, and he no longer had control of it. And I think one thing that was really insightful is that he kind of had to relinquish the control. The main thing that he could do is model the use cases that he found the most compelling and the most aligned with his original vision, and then advocate for those uses and the philosophy behind it and how those could be a force for good, while also being aware that there were going to be companies and people who abused the hashtag and who really used it to spam as an advertiser, who was using it with kind of poor intent. And it was really out of control, and just accepting and embracing that rather than being very angry about it, I think is a very valuable way to think about something that you create that you're no longer in control of and kind of goes so viral that it goes beyond what you are in charge of anymore. So thanks again to Chris for joining us.
Taste and Tactics is available on every major podcast platform and at Taste and Tactics on LinkedIn, X, TikTok, and Instagram. Thank you to our producer, Simran Honda. See you next week.